Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into an incredible economic mystery surrounding the Industrial Revolution. We're going to look specifically at why real earnings changed, or, well, didn't change, between 1770 and 1880.
Let's hook right into our central paradox here. You know, we usually picture the Industrial Revolution as this sudden, massive explosion of wealth and progress. But here's the catch. If it created such unprecedented wealth, why on earth did it take a staggering 80 years for the average worker to actually see a dime of it? Okay, here is our roadmap for how we're going to solve this mystery together. We'll start with the Great Wealth Paradox, then look at Britain's high-wage catalyst, untangle nominal versus real earnings, explore decades of stagnant living, hit the 1850s turning point, and finally look at the birth of modern growth.
All right, Section 1, the Great Wealth Paradox, the myth versus the reality.
So we often assume that factories just brought immediate riches to everyone. But back in 1884, when historian Arnold Toynbee actually coined the phrase Industrial Revolution to describe this massive shift from a rural agrarian society to one dominated by urban factories, the reality on the ground was frankly pretty grim. Even with this dramatic shift toward urbanization, average life expectancy was still just 40 years. For most people, sheer survival was still the daily focus, which totally contradicts this whole idea of sudden widespread wealth.
Moving on to Section 2, Britain's high-wage catalyst. Let's look at Britain's unique spark.
To understand the wage stagnation that came later, we first have to figure out why the revolution kicked off in Britain and not, say, somewhere else. Economic historian Robert Allen has a really fascinating theory here. He points out a stark contrast. Compared to major cities like Paris or Beijing in the early 1700s, London had this unique combination of exceptionally high wages and extremely cheap coal. This specific ratio, expensive labor and cheap energy, is literally the key to our entire mystery.
Because, think about it, that specific price ratio set off a total chain reaction. Step 1, Britain already had those high wages, mostly thanks to its early commercial success. Step 2, businesses obviously wanted to replace that super expensive human labor with cheap energy to maximize their profits. And Step 3, that desire sparked a massive wave of investment in labor-saving machinery. So this specific price structure was the exact catalyst that made it wildly profitable to invent and deploy machines in Britain first.
All right, Section 3, nominal versus real earnings, understanding the true cost of living. Okay, so the machines arrive, production absolutely booms, and cities explode in size. So why didn't the workers get rich right away? Well, we need to clarify some economics here. Nominal earnings is just the actual number written on your paycheck. But real earnings, that's what that paycheck can actually buy at the market once you factor in the cost of living. We absolutely have to anchor our investigation on real earnings, because rapid inflation can easily just gobble up a bigger paycheck.
Just look at this data compiled by Charles Feinstein. Imagine being a worker around, say, 1810. You see your nominal pay literally double from an index of 100 up to 204. You'd think you hit the jackpot, right? Only to go to the market and realize the cost of living also doubled to 203, leaving your actual, real wealth totally flat at exactly 100. It's crazy. It actually wasn't until the 1848 to 1852 period that we finally start to see real earnings climb up to 134.
Let's get into Section 4, decades of stagnant living, the infamous 80-year dry spell. Let's map out exactly how this incredibly long period of stagnation felt for the everyday laborer. Feinstein's data shows a grueling 80-year dry spell. From 1770 to 1815, wartime inflation, specifically from the Napoleonic Wars, just completely stalled out real wage growth. Then from 1815 to roughly 1850, we have these post-war adjustments and agonizingly slow progress. It really truly wasn't until the 1850 to 1880 period that the golden boom of real wages finally kicked in for average folks.
And we also have to remember that looking at an average wage hides a really diverse, messy working-class reality. There were distinct winners and losers here. While some people got these brand new, well-paying, skilled jobs running the factory machines, others, like traditional handloom weavers, were completely displaced by automation and thrown into extreme poverty. It's actually a pretty fascinating historical parallel to the anxieties we have right now around AI taking jobs.
So, why exactly was it so bad for so long? The sources point to a literal perfect storm. You had extreme inflation from those Napoleonic Wars, record harvest failures that drove food prices through the roof, and this unprecedented population boom that literally doubled the workforce in England. Add to that brutal 16-hour factory shifts with just one single hour off for dinner, living in squalid urban conditions, you just have a massive recipe for stagnation. There was simply way too much cheap labor competing just to survive, and that kept wages heavily suppressed. Moving to Section 5, the 1850s turning point. The moment the misery starts lifting. But hey, the story doesn't end in misery. For decades, engineers had been making these tiny incremental tweaks to steam engines and factory machinery. And eventually, as you can see along the trajectory of these micro-improvements, the tech crossed a huge tipping point. Suddenly, mechanization wasn't just profitable in high-wage Britain, it became incredibly cost-effective everywhere, which sparked a massive global industrial expansion. And the human impact of this tipping point was just profound. This era brought some staggering real-world improvements. As incomes finally rose and housing and sanitation slowly got better, we saw a nearly 50% drop in infant mortality rates by 1914 in places like France and Britain. At the same time, average life expectancy stretched from just 40 years up to 50 years. The wealth was finally actually manifesting in the living standards of the working class.
Which brings us to Section 6, birth of modern growth, the point where wages finally align with production.
This pivotal shift gave birth to the modern economic growth cycle that we're familiar with today. But it wasn't just churning out more cotton cloth that drove this real wage boom, it was the creation of a massive engineering industry. The huge expansion of railways and the invention of steam-powered iron ships completely revolutionized global trade. Thanks to these massive infrastructural leaps, the benefits of industrial capitalism finally trickled down, permanently skyrocketing the real earnings index of the working class all the way up to 175 by the year 1880.
The economist F.A. Hayek actually puts this entire 80-year mystery into brilliant perspective. He noted, "Past experience is the foundation on which our beliefs about the desirability of different policies and institutions are mainly based, and our present political views inevitably affect and color our interpretation of the past." Understanding exactly why it took 80 years for workers to genuinely benefit from the Industrial Revolution is absolutely crucial. It helps us interpret economic history without those rose-tinted glasses, and it directly shapes how we might want to design our economic policies today.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder about our own future. As we enter these massive new technological revolutions with artificial intelligence and advanced automation, are we going to marry the long, slow wage stagnation of the 1800s? Or have we actually learned how to distribute the wealth of innovation faster this time around? It is definitely a critical question for our era. Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you next time.